While we know that the pandemic has highlighted the need for agile and flexible manufacturing, we can also see how additive manufacturing has been used to print PPE or ventilators, but it's also exposed gaps in disruptive Australian manufacturing supply chains. So we'll start with Roy Green, followed by Simone Bailey, David, June, and then Berto, and afterwards we'll engage in a conversation. Over to you, Roy.
Thanks, Tim, and hello, everyone. The challenges to manufacturing in Australia didn't start with COVID, nor will they end with COVID, but COVID does give us an extraordinary opportunity to deal with those challenges for the first time in a very long time. Just to go into some background on manufacturing in Australia, it constituted around 30% of our economy in the 1970s. It's now dropped to under 6%, which is a lot lower than most advanced industrial countries. We're not in a post-industrial society, but we're heading in that direction, and this is potentially quite dangerous for us. What are the factors that got us into this situation where, as we've seen with the COVID response, we've got a lot of vulnerabilities and gaps in our domestic manufacturing supply chain? Well, there are two major factors. The first was the tariff reforms of the 1980s and 90s. Tariffs were important to Australia's early industrial development. They protected infant industries, but ultimately became a negative for us as they disguised the lack of innovation and competitiveness of some of our manufacturing sectors. So tariffs were brought down in the context of a large-scale adjustment package by the Hawke-Keating government in 1980s and 90s. And the idea was that given that the world was moving out of large-scale mass production, large vertically integrated manufacturing enterprises towards much smaller interdependent units, small to medium enterprises, which were beginning to pursue more specialized niches in global markets and value chains, that Australia could take advantage of this trend. And to some extent we did. We developed what were then described as elaborately transformed manufacturers, that is, manufacturers with a large measure of R&D, and we began to increase those exports to the selected world markets. But then something else happened, and this is the second factor, and well known to us now, the commodity boom, which certainly benefited many Australians because it added 15% to our national income over a 6-year period without us having to do very much apart from watch the commodity prices go up and up. And this also increased the value of our dollar, which made even the best of our manufacturers uncompetitive or almost uncompetitive. It certainly put a lot of pressure on, and we lost around 150,000 manufacturing jobs over a 2-year period. But it didn't seem to matter because our consumption, our living standards were high, and it was a bit like the so-called Dutch disease in the 1960s and 70s in Holland, where discovery of North Sea gas pushed up the price of the guilder, made a lot of manufacturing uncompetitive, but it resulted in a consumption boom, if only temporary. Similarly, in Britain, with the advent of North Sea oil and gas, consumption boom followed by recession and decline of its currency, but also the hollowing out of its manufacturing sector. Only Norway seems to have coped with this adequately by taking a stake in its North Sea oil and gas assets, developing what has now become the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, over $1 trillion, and using those resources as a result of a resource rent tax of 76% to invest in its future research and innovation infrastructure. Unfortunately, we took the short-term view, we took the sugar hit, and it did hollow out our manufacturing to the point now that it's, as I said, around 6% of GDP. And this was added to by the immense cost competition from China during that period. So now we're in COVID and we see the vulnerability to external shocks of a commodity-based economy. We see that our supply chains have serious gaps, especially in medical equipment. We see that from the latest rankings that the complexity of Australia's economy lags the rest of the world. It's the bottom of the OECD in terms of the research intensity and diversity of our exports, given the dominance of unprocessed raw materials. And we see also that growth in elaborately transformed manufactured exports, while it continues, is overwhelmed by imports, and the ETM deficit has therefore doubled to $180 billion over a 25-year period. And we don't seem to be addressing this very effectively. The investment in our R&D from public and private sources has dropped to 1.79% of GDP, down from 2.2% a few years ago, and way behind the OECD average of 2.4%. In some countries, of course, Switzerland, Korea, Germany, over 3% and continuing to rise. Manufacturing is still 25% of our nation's GDP. In some countries, it's over 50%. In some, it's 80%. Because manufacturing is not just a vertical industry sector, it's a capability, and it's a capability that operates across all sectors. So what does the future look like? Well, that's for us to discuss now. The government has set up a committee, a task force under Andrew Liveris, which has now completed its report. It's going through the government, and we'll no doubt see it in public at some point, looking at the future of our manufacturing industries and capability. It will come forward with some proposals, no doubt. There's also discussion going on into what kind of research support government can provide with the loss of international student earnings by universities. The Beyond Zero Emissions group has published a very impressive document, 1 Million Jobs, which has a large component of low emissions manufacturing. And of course, climate change is a big issue that manufacturing can address. And other countries have also been investing heavily in their R&D and their manufacturing future. So we're well set up to do something ambitious. The future is now Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution, which brings together digital and physical products. And in much of that, we have a lot of talent, but that's talent that we now need to apply to good effect. So that's where we stand at the moment. It is a great opportunity for us. Obviously, COVID is a huge tragedy for us and the world, but it is one from which we can potentially extract some opportunities to build our economy and make it more resilient into the future.
Thank you, Roy. I really appreciate that. David, could I maybe ask you, as the CEO and Managing Director of the IMCSC, to talk about, how life after lockdown, or how this has impacted you, the current lockdown, and what, you think the next year will bring as well?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks for the introduction earlier. Very kind. Look, ironically, this is not about life after lockdown. I'm in Melbourne, and we're all facing down life in lockdown, which is very sad and very destabilizing for many businesses, including SMEs. Just very quickly, IMCRC is an organization that helps companies work with Australian universities around technologies, particularly around things like Industry 4.0. We fund transformative outcomes, and we run a portfolio of about $200 million of total R&D investment into the future of Australian manufacturing. Now, this was all invested well before COVID came along. I think one of the challenges we have in Australia is that actually we don't know, and it's simply not in the public domain, all of the really good stuff that has been happening and some of the great companies that we're going to turn into world leaders. And between ourselves, other CRCs, growth centers, and so on, there's been a huge amount of activity and investment. Look, I'd like to thank UTS. You are one of our partner universities, and it's great that you're taking some thought and action leadership to get the messages out to the broader community. I sense that organizations like CRCs, and my background in 20 or 30 years of manufacturing, that there's a whole bunch of buzzwords now, such as innovation, research, collaboration, digital, even local manufacturing, transformation. These have all of a sudden through COVID become quite fashionable. The challenge now is to turn fashion into reality and into substance. There are lots of organizations like CRCs and many smart businesses that have been investing heavily through these characteristics. But the challenge is, how do we shift the critical mass in Australia? And the critical mass are the small and medium businesses who make up, in most of our industrial sectors, more than 90% of our community. So what does manufacturing or the future of manufacturing in Australia need to look like? I think it's really about one that is engaging. We've got to change not just the public, but the investor shift of manufacturing being seen as an old-fashioned vertical industry sector to one, as Roy alluded to, that is an exciting, a capability, an enabler for multiple industry sectors. In fact, our CRC has projects across 6 different key growth sectors in Australia, from aerospace to building to medtech. So I think the language of manufacturing is one that is probably misunderstood. I would like to see that right down to primary school parents who see that the world of manufacturing high technology is what they want their children to engage in. And if we can shift that, then the appetite will come from the investment community, the workforce skills development will come. I do see that we need to build a sector that is thriving, relevant globally, and integrated globally. It's not going to be about protectionism going forwards. We need to come up with smart products and services that we can sell to the world. I'd love to see a sector that is triple the size of the numbers Roy's been talking about, and not just triple the size for contribution to GDP, but triple the size for the research and development and innovation investment, because that is how we're going to build our future. I see very much the opportunity right now for SMEs to be focusing on thinking about the difference between what is the business that they are in and what is the business model that can be unique and they can be competitive at. And I'll just pause on that, because once companies get the difference between their business and their business model, their thinking, I find, is very much opened up to a whole world of new opportunities. And that's really about thinking about how you can compete and what's unique. Where do we need to start in Australia? Well, I would suggest that a long-term, well thought through national industrial strategy is a good starting point that has full bipartisan support. I know Roy writes and talks much more eloquently than I do about the need for this. But with the SMEs, where do you start right now? Well, I think it's about building some critical mass. A great way to do that is through collaboration, and not just using it as a buzzword, but go and talk to other companies, talk to universities, and find partnerships that you can tackle problems together. Learn, be counter-cyclical. A personal lesson I learned out of the global financial crisis was tackle those things that are hard to do when times are toughest. We over-invested in R&D, innovation, in skills development. And as an automotive supplier, we exited the GFC much faster than our competition because we were prepared for it. But that takes willing and ambitious leadership. And I can think of nothing more important right now, particularly where universities could help, is not just in the R&D space, but helping SMEs develop the leadership and management capabilities, because out of that will come the smart business models and the collaborative appetite to find a way to be counter-cyclical and invest our way out of this awful situation that we're all in. I think that's a way to build a much greater critical mass and capability around manufacturing in Australia more generally. Thank you, Tim.
Fantastic, David. Thank you very much. Simone, within your role, and I mentioned them in the introduction, that you certainly, you have the eyes both on the local but also on the global in your role at Chahama GFG Alliance, and you're a thought leader and futures around this. Would you maybe just tell us about your observations, what has happened in the past and how this affected Chahama?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. David, you touched on some great points I'll come back to shortly, but yes, as GFG Alliance, we're a global organization, which is a good thing at the moment, because we are seeing different trends across each region globally and how everyone is if you like, tackling this challenge, which for us in Australia, we are seen as an opportunity. However, globally, I think it's very important that we remain quite agile. With that, I mean, what are the opportunities that exist onshore to accelerate some of the changes that's required that Roy touched on earlier? I do agree, David, there needs to be investment in all levels, in all layers, whether it's from startups, SMEs, all the way through to very large scale, heavy industrial manufacturers like ourselves. But I also think there's a preconception in the market that to be a manufacturer means you've got to be very heavy on climate, on manufacturing. But actually Sanjeev's vision for our global alliance is to be the opposite and be a more sustainable supply chain into market through aluminium, green steel. We're now looking at hydrogen energy, innovative products such as new market products to construction infrastructure. So if you like, we're trying to connect the dots globally in each region as to what do we make and where, and then how can we diversify our market sectors? How can we actually look at Australia? I think a very skilled workforce, very innovative culture. I've been here 12 years now, and I do think we are able to be very quick to respond to changing conditions. But I don't think we're very good at working very well together as an industry. So I do believe that there are pockets of opportunities, but I think the challenge is now using COVID as a lifetime, once in a lifetime challenge, as an opportunity for the industry to work better together. I think recalibrating some of the domestic markets here onshore, there needs to be a market for that. So if Australia is to bounce back quickly from COVID, I do believe that stimulus and infrastructure construction will help that. But we can't spend the time we usually take conventionally to plan, design, deliver projects to market. I think we have to be innovative in the process as well, not just in the products.
Thank you, Simone, very much. June, you're basically an SME, you know, you're on the face here as well. Could you maybe just expand a bit on that from your perspective, coming from a different scale than, let's say, Simone's context?
Yeah, I heard from Simone, her staff numbers was 7,500 yesterday. We're 50. So that gives you, yes, we are an SME. We have a factory in Western Sydney. You know, we pack a punch, I guess. We have industrial designers, production specialists, engineers, accounts teams, sales teams based around the country. We're a just-in-time manufacturer. We make everything to order, and everything is dispatched from the factory floor. I guess what makes us unique is, but backtracking a bit, for those who don't know what street furniture is, just letting you know, they're just basically things in public space. So seats, benches, bollards and whatnot. But what sort of drives us as a company, David mentioned, what is the thing that, you know, what is your true north? I guess, you know, we had a bit of reflection on that, and we want to bring lasting enjoyment to public places. So we're quite unique in the sense, for an SME, we do invest in collaborative research, excuse the buzzword, sorry, and you know, and we work with universities and clients in R&D, which has been sort of game-changing for us in some aspects. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell. We, you know, how did we pivot from this crisis? We're pretty lucky, I think, as a business. You know, there's a newfound appreciation for public spaces, which has been fantastic for us, of course. And, you know, the government stimulus packages have helped as well. So we're not doing too badly. And we're also trying to work on our export market, surprisingly. You know, we're looking at the US. We just, you know, got a PO for a Google campus job just on Friday. We still get inquiries. How much is a park bench, despite what's happening in the news. So yeah, we're working and we're, you know, experimenting. We're trying to fail early. And I just want to say it's really great to share the screen with Berto today. He taught me back in 1996. So yeah, that's a side note. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jen. I mean, beautifully also handballing it over to Berto, because yes, you two have, worked together as well. And Berto, you are an academic, and you're both involved in industry transformation and research, but certainly also in teaching. So could you please maybe also tell us a bit about how this has affected you and how you see the future?
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone. Thanks, June. That was a lovely segue. So I'm part of the Integrated Product Design Research Unit at the University of Technology, Sydney. Our focus is to support Australian manufacturing SMEs develop and implement strategic and innovative product-based solutions. This is something we know is difficult for them due to their size and their need to address short-term needs. We've worked with a New South Wales Central Coast plant propagation company to develop new tools and methods of working that will result in backshoring a lot of their business. And as Tim and Juna mentioned, we've also worked with Street Furniture Australia in exploring the potential for additive manufacturing, how that might impact on existing manufacturing processes and inventory management. So I guess what we've seen during COVID are terrific examples of the flexibility and agility of Australian manufacturing SMEs. And I think this presents an opportunity for companies to perhaps not focus purely on export. Being able to pivot and diversify their offering to include other types of products may be a strategy to ensure long-term stability and sustainability of Australian manufacturing, particularly in times like now when sourcing locally has become so important.
Thank you, Berto, and thank you everybody for this. Well, I mean, you all spoke about the opportunity that also exists within the current climate, and you all spoke about that there is lots of possibilities. Roy, you started off with making it clear that this is not a challenge that we face that only now has started because of the current pandemic, which certainly has a very significant impact on any aspect of our lives, but it's something that goes much further back as well. Could I maybe ask you to not only expand on what you see the possible opportunities are in there, but also you as the chair of the UTS Innovation Council and former dean of the business school, could you maybe just highlight some more of the kind of problems and the way Australia has approached manufacturing and again the opportunities during this time? Roy, you're also muted at the moment, sorry.
Thanks, yes, sure. Tim, the point to start with is that Australia is not going to be a country that can compete solely or very effectively in labour costs. Like most advanced countries, we're a high-cost economy. That includes now our energy costs. It would be nice to get those down, but the point is that the key differentiators for us, the key sources of competitive advantage will be the quality of what we do, the design of what we do, and the innovation content of what we do. Design, quality, innovation, these are the key sources of competitive advantage for advanced industrial economies today. And in order to do that, we can't do everything. We only do 2% of the world's R&D. A lot of it is going to be about adoption and adaptation as opposed to our own technological developments here. A lot of it is going to be about non-R&D innovation, our abilities at systems integration, our management and workforce skills. We have to design new business models as well as new technologies. And so it's quite a complex interaction, but in order to do that effectively, we have to do so as part of a manufacturing ecosystem. Right now, as David pointed out, we have some world-class companies, micro multinationals, SMEs that have gone global in every state, in every city. But these are isolated in a way that you don't see in countries with a stronger and a deeper manufacturing sector, like Germany, with its Mittelstand companies. We need to build up the interactions, and in order to do so, we do need some priorities to be identified at the national level, and we lack the kind of agencies that other countries have to agree and formulate those priorities. For example, Sweden has Vinnova, Finland has TechEs, UK has Innovate UK, and these are agencies that do technology and knowledge foresighting to decide which are the areas of competitive capability in which the country can be proficient. We can't do everything, as I said, but we do need to focus on what we do well, and that doesn't mean simply picking winners in terms of companies, but it does mean identifying areas of technology and innovation that are going to be central to the so-called industries of the future. And these are industries which cross traditional industry boundaries, which, as we were saying earlier, see manufacturing as a capability, not just as a vertical industry sector. And in order to do that on the ground, we also need collaborative industry hubs of the kind that David runs, the Innovative Manufacturing CRC. We need networks of these across the country, and they have to be well funded. Germany has its Fraunhofer Institutes, Britain, the Catapults, US, the Manufacturing Institutes. These are agencies at the local level that bring together universities, research organizations, companies, and any other actors that can contribute to manufacturing competitiveness, and they do so in a very coherent way. It also means developing our startups in the direction of manufacturing. We haven't really got a manufacturing culture in the context of our startup community. A lot of people still think a product is an app on a smartphone. Let's make sure people think in terms of manufactured products as well. This can be driven by government, not just in terms of research funding, but also and soft infrastructure, but also in terms of public procurement. Public procurement needs to consider the technological capabilities of our local SMEs and build those. Don't just go to the big international suppliers as a sort of default setting. Let's look at ways in which we can build our own capability, and to do so, generally, the key underlying contributor will be our skills base, and that means developing pathways via universities, vocational education and training, so that we can contribute to this manufacturing future. But it doesn't just mean focusing on STEM skills, science and technology skills. It also means focusing on design, on social sciences, on business skills. It requires a lot broader set of skills than were contemplated in the recent fees reset by the government. We now know that in order to be successful, both in startups and in scaling up and in global markets and value chains, we need those broad creative skills as well as the vertical and more specialized technological skills.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Roy. Simone, you mentioned before, I mean, it's maybe to follow up on what Roy said, that, we need to connect the dots, and you certainly also talked about the opportunities exist, within this, crisis that we have, and that there's certainly investment required from levels. But could I maybe just ask you, because you have a very unique position, or not position, but you have a very perspective on all this. If you could maybe discuss a little how JAMA Chiefs Alliance has pivoted in 2020, and discuss how the lockdown has affected your supply chains, and how it is unpredictable. I mean, David is currently still in Melbourne. Things have changed here as well, because you have to both, as I said, from a kind of global perspective, but also certainly how is it different in Australia?
Yeah, sure. So, when you think pre-COVID, we launched late last year our strategy around evolving assets across the portfolio. We're obviously fortunate that we have a national footprint here in Australia. So we cover both metro and regional areas, which has been very lucky given that every state in Australia has been approaching COVID with various degrees of response. So I guess one of the key challenges at the moment is given the kind of every day that this challenge is evolving, how can we maintain our supply chain and our suppliers' supply chain into market with some of these state borders that might be closing down? So logistics and transport, for example, is critical. But also is energy. You know, we're very focused this year in developing our first solar farm called Tana in South Australia, which actually starts on site this month. So it's really important during a crisis that you are obviously reacting to that to look after our people, to maintain their safety and well-being at home, but also operational business so we can continue to manufacture and supply the industry so things don't slow down even further. With Jahama in particular, we're looking at developing our own fund to connect the dots between renewable energy into recycled scrap metal and structural steel, and we call that green steel. We want to use green steel as an example into how to innovate a very heavy industrial product like steel into the market. And now most people would look at the property sector and the big guys in town as where you should be focused on as a supply chain. But actually I look at things differently and look at the disruptors in the market. You know, 12 months ago, you wouldn't think a technology company would now be a property developer. And here we have Atlassian launching a fantastic hybrid structure in Sydney. I think we should be looking at what are the new trends coming up, how can we evolve new products to service those trends, and then scale and replicate those globally. I think that's where the opportunity for Australia exists, because we're going to come through this a lot quicker than other regions.
Thank you, Simone. I mean, certainly, you know, other governments around the world have recognized the opportunity around this, and also to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals, something, you know, UTS is very, very passionate about. And it's really wonderful to hear how, you know, you're working on this as well. David, Roy before talked about the manufacturing ecosystem, and you're certainly, you know, in the middle of that ecosystem. You know, as I said, you're connecting research institutions and SMEs in that space, and also, you know, kind of to see the opportunities within there. From your experience or what has currently been going on, could you maybe, you know, highlight the need for innovation in this sector? You talked about this briefly before, and tell us a little bit more about how the IMCRC has responded to COVID-19.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. I'll start with innovation. We muddy the word innovation in Australia, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. Ask anyone in government, you'll get 10 different responses. I think innovation is quite different from continuous improvement. I also think it's different from invention. We need all three, arguably, if we're going to be a creative nation and we can attract the right people into the industry. Innovation for me is about creating new ideas that you can sell to people, and typically are breakthroughs. We've seen a lot of companies achieve breakthrough results through collaboration during COVID and working together. I'll give you one little example. There's a company that is doing a research project through us up in the Hunter Valley, Whiteley Corporation. They're a 60, 70-year-old family-owned SME making industrial cleaning solutions. Now, they very rapidly changed their business model. They were already working on an R&D project with the university to look at biofilm cleaning solutions. So we're getting into the whole medical space. Well, they managed to get an approval through the TGA in a matter of days to put a new product on the market called ViraClean, which allows everything from hospital wards, stainless steel surfaces and so on to be cleaned with a solution that deals with COVID and other such nasty substances. Long and short, we're 3 or 4 months into COVID. They are now building and are looking to effectively upscale their business several times. They had planned to expand their facility. They're now looking at an all-new facility, creating new jobs, and probably the most advanced of its type in New South Wales. What was the key to their success? Well, I think ambitious, willing, open leadership, who were already embracing in collaborative R&D, innovation, whatever you want to call it. They were already working with other companies and universities to help them on their journey. So I guess the message for me is, what is IMCRC trying to stimulate? We're trying to stimulate the manufacturing sector and the companies within it to look beyond the world of simply production. Manufacturing is much, much broader than just production. Roy talked about design, talked about innovation, but these are all services and capabilities that you can build that move beyond the actual conversion of raw materials or the assembly. And I think you've heard from every one of the speakers so far about that secret sauce that exists. If you can add value beyond simply being a producer or a converter of the raw materials, that I think is what's going to enable you to be better networked. Being better networked allows you to collaborate, allows you to create more ideas. That's where you're going to get the breakthroughs. It's not always about throwing money at it. It's about having the appetite and ambition. And what I've seen is those companies who are really well placed through COVID are the ones that were already doing a lot more of that beyond production, services enabled by production, and selling things of value beyond what they simply make. That's the solution and the opportunity for Australia to build scale.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, again, you highlight the need for, collaboration, sharing ideas, and what we can do. June, you're as the head of marketing innovation for Street Furniture Australia. We heard before from Simone and how it's affected them. As an SME, how have you pivoted during this lockdown?
Collaborative research projects is something we've been doing a lot of since 2016, actually. It's tough as an SME, really. As much as everybody loves innovation, it's also expensive. And SMEs are quite preoccupied by the money in, money out, money in, money out. So as the head of innovation, I'm really interested hearing everyone else's stories today. But we're really lucky. Our bosses do value innovation, and they've made a decision to invest in it. So we've collaborated with, say, Georges River Council, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say UNSW and University of Sydney on this platform, but with them as well. And we've partnered with them for 3 years, mainly in part smart city pilot projects. So continuous improvement is an innovation for sure. It's a very important part of our business. But this collaboration has enabled us to sort of explore and do things in a cost-effective way. We basically co-designed a smart community open-air hub for people to be able to work outside, meet, rest. It has IoT sensors, lots of sort of technological aspects that really opened our eyes to the changing world. So big fan of collaborative research. We just need to keep sort of being focused on what we're about, which is bringing enjoyment to public places.
I mean, of course, and I think collaboration is super important. Collaboration, not just between industry part and government, but certainly also between, research institutions. Of course, we also collaborate with everybody else. So it's not about, exclusion in that at all. And it's very important that I think that we understand this as, as a sector, both industry and university-wide as well. Berto, can I maybe ask you to speak about some of the fantastic projects you worked on with industry that really highlight the need for collaboration for Australian manufacturing, but also, some of the opportunities and challenges that exist there?
Thanks, Tim. Yes, so as I said, we've worked with Street Furniture Australia and with the Plant Propagation Company, and it's an important function that we have. We are able to work with these companies in a way and offer and work in a collaborative way with these companies that's in a small way replicates what large companies are capable of doing. So large companies will have extensive R&D capability. They will have the resources to fund exploratory, speculative work. SMEs, as June pointed out, are not in that position. They are smaller. They are looking more at the day-to-day needs. And so we're playing a crucial role in enabling them to think more in the future. And I think that's been our greatest achievement, is being able to talk with companies like SFA and others about, you know, what's coming, what are the technologies that are available, how are they going to adapt, what are the benefits that these sort of changes will bring to these companies. So it's become quite an important role. But what I'm really excited, it's encouraging what I've seen in the local manufacturing sector, in their ability to, and the term's being used, pivot. And I think this is an important point, because there are manufacturers, you know, high-tech, expert, internationally recognised manufacturers exporting, and we've got some of them in Australia. What we really need is we need volumes of manufacturers. We need more manufacturers. We need to create what I was reading Susan Berger's book, Made in America. They coined the term creation of a fertile industrial ecosystem. And so that can be viewed from a very high-end technological point of view, or from a base level in terms of having just many manufacturers that are surviving, because that's what we need. We need lots of capabilities, lots of different types of skills that are surviving and able to you know, maintain their businesses. And so I saw in the ability for some manufacturers to pivot into different markets a way of saying, I can survive in manufacturing in Australia without having to worry about export. Of course, export is absolutely necessary. But I think if we can find ways of encouraging manufacturing to remain local, be healthy businesses, then I think that's one important step in sort of, you know, moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. At this point, I would like to open also the conversation to all our participants. There's quite a few questions that are coming in, so please keep posting them, and we'll try to answer them all. And if we don't, you know, please feel free to get in touch afterwards, and we can direct them to the panelists. There's a question here from Mark Hilton, and maybe this is to everybody, but maybe Berto, you want to start on that one. He asks, how can we encourage young people to actually make things beyond their degrees in engineering and product design, architecture, fashion, and so on?
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. And it's something that we've been focused on in our program, is maintaining and encouraging that hands-on physical engagement and interaction with materials. What's happening more broadly? Well, I think the maker spaces has been really fantastic for, you know, reaching further into the society, into communities, and offering, especially in sort of urban contexts and where people don't have access to technology, an opportunity to experiment both with sort of advanced technologies like 3D printing and laser cutting and all that sort of thing, but also traditional making techniques, knife making, leatherwork, ceramics. So a lot of that is much more visible, as is the sort of the micro nature of making things. You know, even in the city now, we have breweries and distilleries, micro wineries. I think the notion of making things is just being more dispersed within the society. And the more that occurs, then the more discussions like what we're having today will occur, and it will become more and more of a topic that people will address.
Yeah, thank you, Berto. And did anybody else maybe want to expand on this?
I might just touch on this one actually, Tim. So we see young people being critical in the success of GFG in the future in terms of how you make things. We've set up a GFG Foundation for young cadets in the UK through the Prince Charles Foundation to actually take young, very young, you know, maybe 11, 12-year-olds, cadets all the way through. What does manufacturing mean? How do you make something cool like a Formula One car? You know, really try to inspire them beyond just the generic subjects that they get taught at school. We've trialed that here in Whyalla last year, and it was really successful. We'll be partnering this year with CSIRO and Prince Charles Foundation here to roll that out more broadly. I think young people need to help us prototype, test, and model new things because they think so differently to how we do. And if we train people the same way all the time, we're not going to get anything different in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, really great question there, Mark. We've got a Dimitri Bush and ask a couple of questions. Roy, this one is directly for you. Dimitri asks, you mentioned government overseas that encourage manufacturing. We seem to have a lot of agencies or green and both red tape in Australia. What can be done better here?
Yes, that's a great question. We do spend around $10 billion nationally on research and innovation, which sounds like quite a lot, not as much as other countries, but it is still a lot of money. But if we threw all that money up in the air and asked where it should land, it certainly shouldn't land where it does at the moment. I did a review a few years ago for a Senate inquiry into the innovation system, whose major conclusion was that we don't actually have a system. We have a lot of fragmented agencies and programs trying to do a lot of things, all with the best will in the world, but with no critical mass and no coordination. And it's only compounded by the separate jurisdictions between state and federal. What we found was that our research and innovation spending is spread across 13 different portfolios of government and 150 different budget line items, very few of which connected with each other. So I would say the way forward is to do a stock take of what we actually do, what we support, and propose a new governance structure for our manufacturing ecosystem, which focuses the funding, as I said before, on areas of current and potential competitive advantage, areas in which we can develop strong competitive capability, both domestically and in global markets. And we focus our spending there in a collaborative setting, in conjunction with research organizations and industry, and indeed the development of our role in global supply chains, because often we don't complete an assembly here. We might simply be part of a global supply chain, as we are with, for example, our auto components sector and parts of medtech and defense electronics, mining equipment. We're very good at these things, but we don't do so as coherently and cost effectively as we should.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Dimitri also asked, I mean, maybe just as a follow-up on that, and it's, you know, Roy, maybe it's you or somebody else, and he's also wondering basically on lessons learned from overseas. His question is, what ways could Australian manufacturing management better prepare to reach the same effectiveness as of overseas colleagues?
Yeah, another very interesting point, because what our surveys show, and UTS participated in a global survey of manufacturing management a few years ago that was led by LSE and Stanford, looking at 16 countries as to the quality, as to the quality of their manufacturing management.
And the red questions coming into you with somebody that you know.
We'll just have to ignore that, I'm sorry. As to the quality of their manufacturing management, and what we found was that Australia was somewhere in the middle of those countries across 18 different categories of measurement, which sounds okay, but we weren't in the top drawer of high cost economies that have to compete on the basis of innovation and research. And what was more, we lagged world best practice most in an area where we might think we have a fairly strong affinity, and that was instilling a talent mindset. In other words, our managers are not good at drawing out the talent and creativity of their workforces. And this is something I think that we need to look at in the context of our management development training. We also lagged in terms of the tertiary level qualifications of our managers in Australia compared with other countries, particularly US, Japan, Sweden, Germany. And so the education system needs to align itself to what is required to develop a strong manufacturing culture and manufacturing capability among our managers, as well as within industry, that such skills development is more widely encouraged. We certainly see it in our top companies like Smes, which are international. They have very clearly defined career promotion and reward systems that encourage great quality in their managers. But it's really at the SME level and the level of family companies where we have the biggest challenge.
Mm. Yeah, thanks, Roy. There's another question, one from Maggie Barters. She asks, how do we get startups involved with larger type SMEs? And maybe just, she's also interested how, also with products being manufactured rather than apps, what do the panel think these products in the future will look like? June or David, or maybe Berto?
I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess one word, digitization. So going forward, you know, designing digital customer experiences will be just as important or more important than designing the products that we sell. And we've sort of pivoted in this direction ourselves. So yeah, that just kind of merging of the digital and physical experiences of our products and services, I would say, is the way we're going.
Thanks, June. And Berto, yeah, you wanted to expand that?
Yes, I think we're seeing a lot more of sort of customized products, even with manufacturers that have had a history of mass producing. So we're going to see a lot more diversity in products themselves, being able to demand unique and quite bespoke offerings. And I think that's been made available because of new technologies can enable that. I also think that the issue of startups is an interesting one. You know, how do they get involved with SMEs? And I think that is a huge challenge for startups to move beyond you know, their initial phases and expand without losing what was an important part of how they came to be. And that's an ongoing discussion that's being looked at by a number of people.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. We've got, being conscious of time, we'll probably go a few minutes over, but it's just a good conversation. There's so many fantastic questions. If we don't get to answer them all, please send us your email and we can back to this. One from Alex Wasser, who, David, you probably know well because he's a research fellow in the IMCRC, Design and Robotics. And he writes that SMEs don't always understand how important innovation R&D is to position them during and after COVID. How can we better educate the local private sector in this?
Yeah, really good question. And I think it goes to the heart of a comment I made earlier about a lack of understanding about what innovation can be and what it is. And that definition is different depending on who you talk to. I think a key way of doing it, the way in my experience I used to learn as an SME, was finding out what other SMEs were up to. That comes down to being willing to share not competitive information, but some lessons learned. You know, a company, for example, that may have adopted digital standard operating procedures, you know, iPads on the shop floor, for example, such a simple thing when you think about the availability and access to technology. But so many companies you go into are holding on to paper-based folders, you know, yellowing around the edges, and that's the way they're operating the business day to day. So I think what we need to do is we need to get more of the language out there and more shared learnings of how companies have embraced new ideas, new technologies, new business models, and particularly where successful collaboration has come, even where they are in competition. I think COVID actually has exposed a great number of examples of where companies that traditionally compete are actually finding ways to work together. And one example at the macro level is Coles and Woolworths finding ways to solve problems together that pre-COVID they probably would have been at 1,000 paces apart. Now, if we can get that collaborative culture working at the SME level, then I think we start to unlock one of the things that's held us back, which is this perception we're in competition with everybody, and that's why we don't collaborate. the universities are the same in that regard, I have to say. So it's as much a cultural thing, which is why I think it comes back to leadership, appetite and maturity to go and start those conversations, because you might be amazed where the conversation can go.
Absolutely. There's maybe one last question, and this is from Governor Bhatia. What's the panel's view on decentralized and collaborative manufacture? Will this expand to other industries or contexts?
Have a go at that.
Yeah, sure, Roy.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, what the questioner I think is referring to is the development of industrial clusters, and clustering is a key factor in successful manufacturing. It's something that we don't do so well in Australia, partly because of our very dispersed geography, but it is the role of agencies like the IMCRC and also the one I'm chair of, the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Hub, which is based in Brisbane, to encourage the development of these clusters and ecosystems of complementary manufacturing capabilities that can together develop greater strengths than if they were pursuing their product strategies in isolation from each other. The very good examples around the world are the Mittelstand in Germany and specific components of that, such as an area that I've referred to occasionally in the past, which was the centre of German clockmaking in the Black Forest, and which has now repositioned itself with the decline of clockmaking there to becoming the world's leading suppliers of surgical instruments. And this is done by a number of companies, SME level companies, working together to ensure, both in collaboration and in competition to some extent, that they are ahead of the curve when it comes to manufacturing technology in this area. They work together with a local university. They supply some of the teachers in that university. The students do internships in the company. The Fraunhofer Institute does foresighting of what the surgical instruments market will look like in 30 years' time. And that's the sort of industrial cluster that we need to try and focus on much more in Australia around our industrial cities, Western Sydney, Western Melbourne, Newcastle, parts of Brisbane, Adelaide, and so on. And there are embryonic versions. The Tonsley Innovation Hub in South Australia is a good example of what we need to try to do more of.
Yeah, thank you. David, did you want to say something to this as well before, or?
My comment was very much like Roy. It's about building some critical mass, and I think there are some really good examples around the world, but key to us is customizing those for Australia. You can't copy innovation systems, but I think to one of Roy's earlier comment, there's an awful lot of consolidation and back to basics that we can do. There's plenty of funding in the system. There's plenty of support. It's just not well directed. And I think COVID's the opportunity to do that. It's got to be purposeful. And I think if we can target supporting the larger companies to invest more into Australia, if we can support the SMEs, and if we can connect the dots between those large companies and the SMEs, then the SMEs are going to find opportunities to go global ultimately. The universities are part of the catalyst for that to take place, as they are elsewhere in the world. But it's going to change. It's going to need a different type of thinking in Australia to embrace that.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, on this. And, you know, again, for taking your time and sharing your thoughts and insights on this. I mean, it has certainly been clear from, as you all mentioned, there's also an opportunity within this. And it's really wonderful to hear how everybody is, you know, just strengthening and further arguing that we need collaboration between industry and between research organizations. You know, I really like, Roy, your description of an ecosystem that is complex. We certainly have a quite complex economic situation as well. We are in a post-mining boom and therefore need national strategies around this. You all have highlighted, you know, there are opportunities. We certainly require funding for research and innovation and to integrate the digital and the physical, and with that as well. And this notion, you know, of clustering and a kind of distributed network as well that so many people are involved in as well. Would I also thank our attendees for participating. That was really wonderful. It's obviously a very important conversation to have. So I will wrap up our conversation here. I know there's more questions, sorry about this. I will send them to the panel members for them to reply as well. And we also hope you can attend tomorrow's Life After Lockdown event with former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull on entrepreneurship. I forgot to say at the beginning also this conversation was recorded, and you are able to access this as well as previous events on our UTS YouTube channel, or just check out uts.edu.au/events. And maybe lastly, just, you know, as there's always an opportunity, there are also a series of UTS taster courses, which are free. I think it was highlighted by many that we also need to have a kind of skills change. It's really important within that. And please check out the university website for that as well. On that note, thank you, everybody. I hope all you and your loved ones stay safe and sound. David, I hope I will be able to come to Victoria latest in October, and all have a wonderful day. Thank you.